Today I want to talk to you guys about 4 dimensions of inertia in Berlin. We haven't covered it yet, but inertia describes the resistance to state change, whether that means that a physical thing is in motion or in rest. And I'm going to start talking about physical dimensions like points, one-dimensional lines, two-dimensional planes, three-dimensional volumes, particularly in Berlin, that have inertia to remain in rest. And then later I'm going to get on to time and motion in cities. So if we look at cities as points on a globe, one thing's clear. We're not going to be able to pick up Berlin and put it next to New York tomorrow. We have a physical location here, and it's affected by climate, topography, neighboring cities and regions. But Berlin can also be thought of as composed by one-dimensional lines, like property lines, which can be pretty hard to change, and they affect the way buildings stand. And these are largely invisible lines that support a socio-political framework of ownership and urban policies that in some cases require setbacks within the property lines and can be pretty complex when they're affected by political boundaries like borough divisions. I don't think that the architect necessarily wanted to build a triangular building here between Charlottenburg and Mitte. Just happened that way. In some cases, we also think of Berlin as like a two-dimensional plane, like a network of streets, a complete abstraction of reality. But this has a pretty incredible staying power. And the next slide is 2 aerial views of Berlin before and after World War II. And you can see that a significant portion of Berlin's buildings were wiped out, yet the streets are still basically there. And the next slide, the top is from 2012, and still the streets are hard to move for the most part, despite a really strong modernist desire in the 50s to start anew and try something else. So why did these streets stay put? Why, when all the buildings were wiped out here in Berlin, or so many? The reason is because infrastructure of streets is not just on the surface. If you look at streets three-dimensionally, you'll see there's a hell of a lot going on underneath them, like plumbing, sewage, gas, the subway. And by the way, thinking about these train slides, subways in Berlin are completely mind-blowing. If you're normally as a person, you move through space and space is at rest. In the subway, you're moving in the same direction as the train, and the space begins to move around you in the other 2 dimensions. Okay, but considering all of these things, location, property lines, streets that have so much inertia and are so hard to move, how did they get that way? And that's where we also begin to talk about time or history. So I'm going to do a quick review now of Berlin's history. In the 1200s, the double city of Berlin-Cologne was situated along a few important trade routes going both north-south and east-west. Right here, they could find an easy crossing over the Spree River, so Berlin rose in importance. By the 1600s, it had become the residence of the Prussian Kurfürst and was built up with royal and military institutions, some being really heavy stone. And by the 1800s, Berlin was really growing. Industrialization had hit, population was getting out of control, there were offices, palaces, factories, and ghettos. And by the 20th century, the next slide, trains and standardized time were really changing everything. And this map is actually current day Berlin cut off at the edge of the S-Bahn ring, which was finished around 1900. Because my argument is that the S-Bahn ring is actually the 4th wall of Berlin, and each of the eras that I've just shown you were fundamentally characterized by city walls, from medieval wall to fortification with military bastions to a brick wall that taxed goods to an efficient train network. And these walls have made Berlin a relatively concentric city, not so uncommon for Europe. But there's a sort of growth ring pattern you can isolate out of the roads in Berlin. And the trade routes I mentioned, that were going through the gates of the various walls, have created really strong axes in most of the biggest streets, like Siebzig, Muni, Schönhauser Allee, Karl-Marx-Allee, Mehringdamm. And these concentric forces are even bigger than this, and have a kind of abstract will. Personally, I think Berlin wants to be a circle, and it's ambitious, always trying to incorporate its neighbors. So when the A10 motorway was put like a belt around Berlin, it wanted to eat Potsdam and got a little bit lopsided. So all of these walls have determined the motion and growth of Berlin, but I also want to leave you with the idea that the rings have determined our motion and how we move through the city every day.